Hi there. Are you ready to break free from emotional eating, build a healthier relationship with food, and finally feel in control? If that sounds like you, you're in the right place. My name's Jill Nicholson. I've been a therapist for 25 years. I'm a BACP accredited therapist, a clinical supervisor, and the co-creator of the Rapid Imprint Resolution Method. But most importantly for this video, I am an ex-emotional eater. Aged 20 years old, I weighed 20 stone, which is 280 pounds. I was a chronic emotional eater. Have you ever found yourself reaching for a bag of crisps or chips or a tub of ice cream after a stressful day, a long day, even when you're not physically hungry? If so, you're not alone. Today, we're going to talk about emotional eating, what it is, why we do it, and how can we redefine our relationship with food to bring more balance and peace into our lives. So let's look at what emotional eating is. It is the act of eating in response to our feelings rather than our body's natural signals of hunger. It's not about physical hunger, it's about emotional hunger. It's the difference between eating because our body feels tired, it needs fueled, and eating, on the other hand, because we're trying to soothe ourselves or distract or numb. It can have different functions and different meanings for each individual. But here's some of the phrases my clients in the past have used to label their emotional eating. They've called it boredom snacking, mindless munching, comfort nibbling, constant grazing, distraction eating, habitual snacking, and emotional munching. Think of it this way: emotional eating can feel like self-medicating with food. Food becomes a way to regulate our emotions, whether it's stress, boredom, sadness, or if we're afraid that we're not pleasing people and we're a people pleaser, or if we believe that we're just not good enough in some way, we then eat to soothe those feelings away, to feel better again. The roots of emotional eating are often traced back to childhood. Many of us learned early on that food equals comfort. Maybe you got a treat if you've been upset or if you fell down and scraped your knee. Or perhaps family celebrations always centred round indulgent meals. Over time, food becomes emotionally charged. It becomes the symbol of love, of reward, or relief, or for some, a way to regulate their emotions and cope. I worked with a client once who had been adopted when she was 3 years old. For her, food became a comfort during stressful times or when she was feeling not good enough. It was her way of creating safety in an uncertain world. It was like her comfort blanket. I find that there's always a story underneath people's emotional eating. There was a story underneath mine. And you know what? The story always makes perfect sense, even if you don't think it does. So, emotional eating, in one way, it helps us, in another way, it hurts us. And that's the thing, emotional eating does help in the short term. It offers a quick hit of comfort, it distracts us from anxiety, and it provides a sense of control when everything feels overwhelming. That's because food activates the brain's dopamine system, especially with hyper palatable foods like sugary foods or processed snacks. But while it might help us feel better temporarily, emotional eating can also lead to guilt and shame, and over time, potentially health issues for some. It's a double-edged sword. It's a coping mechanism that soothes, and at the same time, it stresses us. Let's pause for a minute. I want to tell you about some of the things I learned when researching people who have never dieted. Their weight has always been stable. Here's some of the things that I learned. To them, food is just food. They're people who have a healthy, balanced relationship with food. And why is that different? And how is that different from emotional eaters? Now, I'm actually going to do a deeper dive into that in a future video. But for today, let's just look at three core differences. The first one, they eat to satisfy physical hunger only. They know their body's signals and they respond accordingly. So they know when they're hungry, they know when they're starting to get full, and they stop eating. And they don't eat if they're not hungry. Secondly, they don't attach an emotional or moral value to food. This means that food doesn't have an emotional charge. Food is neutral. It's just a pleasant fuel. And for them, no food is good and no food is bad. Thirdly, they allow occasional indulgences without guilt. So their indulgences are not constant, they're not frequent, they're occasional. So, for example, a dessert like a sticky toffee pudding with chocolate sauce and whipped cream is eaten occasionally, and it's savoured. Every crumb is savoured without any self-criticism and without berating themselves. So these habits that people with a healthier relationship with food have are not about willpower, but about having a peaceful relationship with food. And the good news is these habits can absolutely be learned. Let's talk about how to tell the difference between physical and emotional hunger. With physical hunger, it comes on gradually and it's usually felt in our stomachs. And it can be satisfied with any type of food. So it could be satisfied eating an apple as much as by eating a chocolate biscuit. Emotional hunger, on the other hand, is usually sudden. It comes on suddenly. Like I'm really hungry. I want this. I need this. And it can feel like a craving, like a strong urge. And it's often linked to a specific food. So if you have a strong craving and it's for a food that is either a hyperpalatable food, so over processed, if it's a food that has salt or sugar or fat, that kind of combination, like cookies, like cake, like pizza, like crisps or chips, it is very likely to be an emotional hunger and not a physical one. You know, for me, emotional hunger often masked my anxiety in the past, in my teens and when I was 20, up till probably mid-30s, to be honest. I find that if I wasn't being perfect, if I wasn't pleasing people, my anxiety would rise. And I would think I was hungry. I would say things like, oh, I'm starving. Oh, I'm so hungry. But it wasn't physical hunger, it was emotional. So, moving forward and changing your relationship with food, it takes time and it takes us being compassionate to ourselves. So, let's start with two small steps. First one, let yourself feel physical hunger by delaying a meal by an hour or more. Notice the physical sensations of hunger, what they are. Now, for me, I would get this hollow feeling in my stomach, a bit like a painless ache, if there is such a thing. I start to feel quite cold when my body needs food and when it needs refueled. Knowing what physical hunger feels like is vital. So you will be able to recognize it and then to go a step further and recognize emotional hunger and the difference between the two. So to know which you're experiencing. Secondly, identify the emotional triggers. What is triggering you into that urge to eat? Next time you feel that urge for chocolate or cheese, grab a notebook and write down what emotions you're experiencing. Catch them in the moment before you eat, because that will give you an insight into what you're feeling and what you actually need. And it might surprise you that it might not be food. So by this I mean the desire for a yummy, for a treat, is actually the secondary issue, not the primary issue. The primary issue is the emotions you are experiencing, which are caused by the situations, the events, and they could be events that are in your present, that are happening just now, but they could also be an echo of events or things you experienced in the past. Could be about your relationships, about your work. It's important to remember, emotional eating is not a fault. It's not a failure. It is a coping mechanism that you've used to get through life. You did your very best. From today, try and get in touch with that physical hunger. So you know when you're hungry, you know when you're starting to get full, and identify your triggers. What is making you want to go to the cookie jar? What's just happened that's making you open the cupboards looking for a snack? And if you do those two things, you'll be taking the first steps towards truly listening to your body, honouring your emotions, and discovering new, healthier ways to care for yourself beyond food. As someone who has been there, a former emotional eater, I want you to know there is always a way forward. Join me next time and I'll share my personal journey of overcoming emotional eating and losing 120 pounds. You don't want to miss it. See you next time. Bye-bye.